Just so for starters, I'll introduce myself. I'm Scott Hunter. I'm a program manager on the ASP NET team, and we're going to show a bunch of cool stuff today. I've also got Phil Hack, who is the program manager on MVC, and I've got Bertrand Leroy, who is the PM on Ajax. So they're all going to come up and do a couple demos for us later today. So let me start off with and say, kind of what the session objectives and takeaways are. The main thing is we want to walk through our 4.0 feature roadmap and kind of discuss all the big items on the list. We want to talk about which audiences these things are targeted for, what scenarios, and what competition are we trying to go against with those. Something else is we want to explain to you guys how we use the community to drive what we do in ASP.NET. I'm going to drill into that a whole bunch today because that's very vital to how we design ASP.NET. And really the takeaways I want from everybody is to see what we're going to do in 4.0, to know how to change what we're going to do moving forward in the future. You have a voice in ASP.NET. So I want to start with and kind of talk about the releases we've done recently. So this starts with we did a futures release in July of 2007 that contains some things like an early version of dynamic data. It contains some Ajax history stuff, a bunch of other Ajax stuff as well. We followed that up with a extensions preview in December of 2007. This was mainly the content that was going to be in ASP.NET or .NET 3.5 SP1. And then starting in March, we started doing some new stuff. And what that was we started off with a preview of .NET 3.5 SP1 beta, but we also started doing something new, which was putting stuff on CodePlex with MVC. As I said, started in March of 2008, and that's ongoing. And you're going to find that that's a vital part of what we do moving forward. Frameworks come around every 2 or 3 years. The web is developing faster than every 2 or 3 years, and so we need a way to actually get our new bits up to you guys on a faster pace than every 2 or 3 years. And so CodePlex is our main drive for that. Kind of the way this works moving forward is you'll see that we have done stuff on CodePlex all the way to the end of the year. Coming in VS10, we have things like Ajax, dynamic data, MVC, potentially. The way this works is on ASP.NET. That's where formal releases are. So if you want to go grab something that's, if you're doing production type stuff, you go to ASP.NET, and that's where everything we've actually released will be. You can download there. There'll be quick starts, all that kind of stuff. And then on CodePlex, that's where you're going to find our interim work. So if you go on CodePlex today, you'll find a lot of Ajax work up there. The MVC work is up there. We've got some dynamic data work up there. We even have some web form stuff around image generation up there as well. And we're going to continue to add more on that site. So, as I said, the CodePlex ASP NET is cutting edge. Sneak peeks, formal, informal releases, and that's really where we're asking for feedback from you guys. We're going to do a lot of releases on CodePlex over the next couple years. Part of what you can get on CodePlex is you can also get source code for almost everything we put up there. So not only do you get the new bits, but you get the source code for those bits. I'll show in a second. You can also see the roadmaps for each of the technologies, which kind of gives you an idea of what we know is going to go into the next version of the framework, stuff that we're not sure is going to go in the next framework, and stuff even further out. Right now on our CodePlex site, we're getting about 1,100 downloads a day. We've had 61,000 downloads to date and about 216,000 page views. So what I'm going to do now is actually show CodePlex. We actually released a bunch of new bits on CodePlex today. So let me run up here, codeplex.com/ASP.NET. And so this is our landing page on CodePlex. And you'll notice here that we have all of our major pillars. So here's MVC is the first one. We have Ajax, dynamic data. If I drill into one of these, I'll drill into the dynamic data one for fun. What you're going to see is each page is going to obviously have a link to the download, and we're going to have a roadmap. So I can drill in on the roadmap here. And you can see this is kind of what we're planning to do in Q4 of this year and what we think we're going to do next year out of band for dynamic data. Today, we just released new bits. A lot of the stuff we're going to demo today is stuff you can actually just go and grab off of here. And just jump back. Go to the Download tab. And from here, you can see we've got the new AJAX preview that went up today. We've got the new dynamic data web forms code that went up today. We have the new dynamic data MVC work that went up today. And we have MVC up here. So, you know, if you want to see all the latest, greatest stuff, come here. It's current. So let me jump back. So the other thing I want to make a point about the CodePlex stuff is links on all those pages also go to forums. And that's where we actually get a lot of the feedback from you guys. So what I really encourage everybody to do is go try the bits that you're interested in, download them, and give us feedback in the forums. That's going to drive what we do in ASP.NET moving forward. Download the bits, give us feedback on what you like or don't like. Something else I should have pointed out is when you're on the site, you'll notice that there's actually an issue tracker up here as well. So that's another place that you have to send us feedback on how the releases work, right up here. So let's talk about Visual Studio 2010. Obviously, one of the big things for us is going to be multi-targeting support. So with Visual Studio 2010 and ASP.NET, you're going to be able to load up and target Framework 2, Framework 3.5, Framework 4.0, all within Visual Studio. So you can develop against any of those with Visual Studio 2010. The next thing is we're going to try to maintain a very high compatibility bar with 3.5. So the idea is if you have an application written in ASP.NET 3.5 and you migrate to 4.0, it should not break your application. 4.0 is a side-by-side release, which means you will have to actually manually tell the server that you want to run on 4.0 versus 3.5. But when you do that, it should run fine. The other thing is all these investments that you see on CodePlex, our goal is to, when the major frameworks come out, to take all those investments and roll them up into the next framework. So when you look at the AJAX work up there and you look at the dynamic data work up there, that's all going to roll into the 4.0 framework. So now we'll kind of talk about the themes that we're going to work on in 4.0. First off is standard support, best platform for standards work. And what that means is we want to have great CSS support. You're going to see that hopefully in some of the web forms work that we do, where you can actually have much better control of CSS. We want to have best in AJAX, and we want to support HTML standards. Another thing that we want to do is, a big pillar for us is to be the best in line of business applications. I think this is an area that we're actually really strong in today, and we want to make it much stronger. So another area is pattern-based development. So that's where the MVC framework comes into play, where it's very good for supporting test-driven development. So if you want to do test-driven development, MVC is a very pattern-oriented framework for that. And we want to reinvest in core ASP.NET as well. So you're going to see a lot of improvements in our core framework, and I'm going to get into some of those in a few minutes. So these areas that kind of correspond to what I just mentioned are, we have investments in web forms. We have investments in our core infrastructure, so you're going to find things like the caching mechanism in ASP.NET is going to actually be replaceable with a provider model. MVC is a core theme of ASP.NET 4.0. Data. We have a bunch of really cool stuff around data controls that I can't wait to show later today and in my dynamic data talk later in the week. lot of new stuff with that. And we have some great work in Ajax, which you're going to see in some demos here today, which is kind of doing the equivalent of having a data source and controls, repeater type controls in client side. So let's move forward and drill right into each of the actual areas. So I'm just curious, who in the room is doing ASP.NET Web Forms type work today? How many people hate the IDs that are generated by those things? So one of the things that we're going to do is we are going to give you control of those IDs in ASP.NET 4.0. So you will be able to actually specify on the controls the ID you want. And they will actually come out that way. When you're doing data that's doing repeating over data and stuff, you'll actually be able to provide like a prefix of what you want that to look like, and it'll tag something on the end, obviously, because there has to be uniqueness. But this should help a lot in JavaScript work where you really want to know what the IDs of stuff are. And you just want to get away from some of that bloat that you have from, as you nest items, it just gets worse. So the next area is, I'm really curious about this one as well. Who in here has used our CSS adapters that we released, a couple years ago? So what the CSS adapters do is they allow the controls that are shipping in ASP.NET today to change their rendering and render using CSS instead of rendering using the tables and stuff they do today. So we're doing work to try to put that in the actual ASP.NET 4.0 as a mainstream feature. And we'd like to actually do that in a way where you don't even have to realize that there's a control adapter there. You just say, hey, I want these controls to render a CSS, and they render a CSS, and you can change that. So that's something that we're really excited about. Something else is when we started releasing previews of MVC a year or so ago, it contains something called URL routing. And this is basically a way that you can control, let's say you're building a website today. It might have a URL that's like store/products/category, actually store/products, !category ID equals 5. And that's not very useful when you're trying to build sites that have, want to be search engine friendly and stuff like that. So URL routing allows you to change those URLs. So you could actually have a nice, pretty URL that's like store/products/televisions/manufacturer of your choice. And this is something we've had in MVC, and we're going to actually move this into web forms as well. So you'll be able to easily do this in web forms. And when you're actually using data binding controls, you'll have a URL route parameter that you can actually add in there to pull the value from the route and actually apply it to your data. The next thing is, who hates view state? So one of the biggest problems, view state in itself is not bad. What makes view state bad is the fact that we overuse it. And one of the hardest things today is anybody in this room that's challenged with view state is today, if you turn it on at the parent, you basically have to be turned on at the parent, and then you can turn off individual stuff. But as soon as you turn it off for something, anything that's hosted inside of it can't be turned off. So it's kind of backwards. And so we're going to actually give what we call granular control of view state, which means you'll be able to actually turn it off on the page and just turn it on for the controls you want versus turning it on and turning it off a million places. So it should be much easier just to say, I want it off for the page and turn it on for these 3 controls, and it's out of your way. So that's something we're going to do. And if you've ever used grid view or list view, they actually have problems with view state today. So if you actually turn view state off on these controls, they have optimistic concurrency problems. And we're going to address those too. So, and the other enhancements we have in web forms is around the dynamic data area. But it's going to be further, even bigger than that, because we actually have a lot of neat work in actual data controls when it comes to being able to have much richer queries, which I'll demo today. The next area that we want to focus on that's very important to us is Ajax. We have a bunch of really cool stuff for Ajax coming up. First off, a question again is, who in here likes JavaScript? We got a few. So one of the things we want to do is we want to actually appeal to JavaScript developers. So that's important. I mean, obviously, in this room, there's not a lot, but there are plenty of people out there that are hardcore JavaScript people. We want to appeal to them as well. But we also want to appeal to the page developers, the people that didn't raise their hands for that last question. And so part of that is we have some rich templating controls it almost feels like server-side code to me. You can basically drag you can have a data source on the client-side page. You can have a templated repeater, and you can actually have it firing events like sorting and stuff. Bertrand's going to do a cool demo of that in a few minutes. jQuery. jQuery is something cool. Let me see if I have it in my browser. We actually, we're going to ship jQuery in the next version of the framework with ASP.NET. And today, the jQuery actually released the IntelliSense files to make jQuery work inside of Visual Studio. So I was just going to see if I have that in my browser. Give me 1 second, I'll bring it up. So if you went to this jQuery and went to their download page, which I have up here, let's find this. You'll see that right down here we've got Visual Studio. And this will give you full IntelliSense in jQuery. That's available today. The next thing that might be exciting is, who in here has used the Ajax Control Toolkit? Wow. So one of the things that we're doing is the Ajax Control Toolkit is going to be moved into ASP.NET. So we're going to formally support it in ASP.NET. So that's, moving forward, it'll be part of our strategy. We're going to work on it, fix bugs in it, and we're going to add new controls to it. So I can't highlight what those controls are going to be because Bertrand won't let me yet, but hopefully some cool stuff coming. And something else we want to do is centralize our script libraries and break them up for better performance. So I'll let Bertrand come up and do a demo.
Thanks, Scott. You have no idea how impressive it is to see that many people for this session. I'm impressed, really. I'm very happy to see that. So what I want to show you today is kind of a sample of the application that I'm going to build in my own session, which is on Thursday, 1:45. And the first thing I want to show you on this application, I want to draw your attention to one specific thing, which is that if you look at the URL bar here. Oh, I wasn't on. That's probably better. Thanks. So here, if you look at the URL here, what you may notice is that this is an HTML page. And it's actually... So what that means is that in this page, there is pretty much nothing running on the server. The only thing that's running on the server is an ADO.NET data service, and it's just going to provide us the data in JSON form. So what you just saw was actually the ADO.NET data service spinning up. Apparently, it went to sleep before the demo. So here you can see really dynamic data being brought back from the server and formatted completely on the client. There is no rendering code running on the server in any of that demo. So here I have a master view that's being rendered. You can see that you have nice alternating style. Well, nice if you think that my designer skills are nice, which they probably aren't. But really, you have some nice formatting on the client, including some localized, globalized price formatting here. And you can select an object and look at the details on the right here. And all that is being handled on the client side. So let me show you some of the source code for that. There you go. So here in this page, I'm adding a few script files, and what you really want to look at is the actual templating work that we've been doing. So this, for example, is the details view in our application. So it has a data view component that's being attached, and here we're doing things declaratively. You don't have to go declarative completely. You can actually do exactly the same thing that I'm doing here imperatively by creating a new component and attaching it to the HTML element. But here I wanted to show the declarative part, which will make all this feel very much like the server-side model. So here I've been attaching a data view, and I've been setting the data property of that data view to the selected data property of my master view. So here, completely declaratively, I've made it possible to click on an item, select it, and have the details view immediately react to those changes. And the way you actually bind data is by using the binding syntax, which, if you're familiar with WPF, it looks very much like it. And those are live bindings. So that means that, for example, here on this input, we are binding the name of the product to the value property of the input tag, which means that if I'm modifying this here, you'll see that everything that depends on that value will change. And by the way, I just added some nice animation. And this is interesting because here I'm actually using jQuery to do that animation. And the way it works is that on the binding here, and on each of the bindings actually, I have a handler that will handle all the changes on that property and call that function every time the value changes. And what this function is doing is actually looking at the target of the binding, which is here, and it's calling a JSON plugin to do the animation. So it's really very simple to integrate jQuery with your ASP.NET Ajax applications. But there is a lot more to this application. One other thing is command bubbling, which is a very powerful concept that enables the page developer to create a UI that triggers actions in the application without having to tightly couple. So you don't have to create a click handler on the button, for example, on the select button here, and write some code that will change the selected event or anything like that. The way it's actually working, it's actually a lot simpler than that. If you look at the template, this one, that is the button that I was referring to. And you can see that it has a sys command attribute here that says select. And that's all you have to do to enable selection on this button. And I did actually the same thing on the TR so that you can actually click anywhere on this row and select it. And what is going to happen is that when you click on that element, the select command will bubble up and select the item. So we've got all those nice concepts that actually existed on the server, but now are getting translated in a very nice declarative way on the client. So I could go on like this, and actually I will go on like this for a full hour on Thursday, and I encourage you to come to this session. I just want to also attract your attention on the fact that we are handling the history here of the page so that you can go back to previous products that you've been browsing to, which is a nice feature too. So really, this application is a full-blown application that you can deploy today using the bits that we released today on Codeplex. So thank you very much. I give back the mic to Scott.
So I think Bertrand pointed this out before the screen came up. You can also notice that the extension for the file is HTML. This is proving there is no ASPX or anything. It's just totally just an HTML file doing all client-side work. So pretty cool. So the next thing we want to talk about is the ASP.NET MVC framework, which we just released into beta, what, 2 weeks ago, Phil? I think 2 weeks ago. I'm curious, who in the room has played with this? Any MVC people? All right. So Phil has a talk right after this talk where he's going to drill in and give an hour on MVC. So if you're interested in MVC, I recommend you come and stay for that. MVC for us is basically trying to open ASP.NET to a different audience. I mean, we have the audience today, we're using web forms, and we want to open up ASP to a different audience that people like Ruby on Rails developers, PHP developers, Django developers have been using. We want to bring that to ASP.NET. Part of this is model view controller, and what you might ask is what is that? And as I said, Phil's going to go into that in detail in the next session, but really what it is, it's separating your application out into, your data goes in your model, your controller does all the actual underlying work, and your view just displays the data. And so basically what you're doing is you're removing the logic from your view and moving that into the controller. And because you do that, it's much easier to test, because the hardest stuff to test is, user interface stuff when you've got your logic in your actual user interface page. And that's what we call the separation of concerns. The other thing is MVC supports the URL routing features that we talked about. And I'm not going to be able to demo it today, but we have some cool tooling support for MVC coming as well. Maybe to the point of actually being able to have it build some pages automatically for you when you pointed at an object. And finally, the other cool part of MVC is it's just part of ASP.NET. So all the cool parts of ASP.NET, profile, membership, roles, request, all the core functionality you're used to is still there and can be accessible. So moving forward, we're looking at cool things like asynchronous controllers, subcontrollers and views. You might see some declarative type controls and validation show up in MVC as well. One of the things that I'm going to demo later today is dynamic data for MVC. And this is kind of our scaffolding story for MVC. Give it an object, go build a view automatically for you, and do things like validation. Something else that we're going to demo in just a second is we're looking at doing AJAX support for MVC as well. So Phil's going to come up and do some demos showing some partial rendering and stuff. So with that, I will let Phil come up.
All right, so what do I switch it to? Excellent. Hi, everyone. Let me just close this down and find my demo. There we go. So Scott mentioned that we're going to include jQuery with Visual Studio, the next version of Visual Studio. One of the nice things about having these out-of-band releases is that we just recently released ASP.NET MVC beta, and it's the first product that includes jQuery, which is a really great thing because it's one of the few products, framework-type products at Microsoft that includes an open-source contribution untouched. And not only that, we also contributed back to an open-source project, which is something that is relatively not widespread. So one of the things that I'm excited about coming from an open source background myself is that we're really trying to break new grounds in terms of openness and community involvement and playing nice with others. So let me just hit Control F5 to get this demo running so we can take a look at it. And what I want to show off is a little bit of AJAX within the context of ASP.NET MVC. And one of the nice things about MVC that I'll talk about in a little while is it really puts you in control. So sometimes there's more work for you to do, but sometimes it kind of peels away the layers and lets you get right to what you want to do and makes scenarios such as AJAX fairly easy. So in this example, it's relatively simple. I'm going to call an action method, and it's going to return a couple bits of information using JSON and update these two different regions. So the scenario here is that I make an AJAX call and I want to update 2, maybe 3 unrelated regions of the page based on the data that came back. And I do it again in jQuery. And the point of that is to show that it doesn't matter which JavaScript framework you're using. We're calling a method on a controller, getting JSON, and updating 2 fields. So let's take a look at the source code. Whoops. Ajax. Oh, there we go. So I'm going to scroll down here to the all right, so I just need to adjust my eyes here. Okay, so we have this message EM tag. This is where we're placing the JSON results. So when we click on these buttons, we have this method that we call getServerData. Scrolling back up and taking a look at that method, this is a straight up Microsoft Ajax code right there. So I set a URL in this third line here, and then I call the method. And that URL is a URL to a controller action, and we'll look at that in a sec. And what I get back is JSON, so I can just start grabbing properties from that, such as message and values, and put that in the inner text of these 2 DOM elements. So the server side of this is extremely simple. Whoops. So, yep. So I've been asked to bump up the size of the source code. Let's try 16. And you tell me if that's good. All right, here we go. Thank you, thank you. I know how to use the font dialog. Thank you very much. All right, so we have this method. So not going into too many details about how MVC works, though, but you notice that that URL that we set in the JavaScript corresponds to a method on your controller class. And in this case, I just returned this anonymous object. So I don't know if you're not familiar with what I'm doing here. This is a new feature of, I think, C# 3.0, being able to define an anonymous object, so there's no class type name that you know at compile time at least. And I just set a couple properties. And what's great is that in terms of JSON, it's just going to take those properties, serialize into JavaScript, and send it right down to your client, and now your client can make use of that. So you notice there's nothing in your way here. You just define this object, return it, reserialize it. You use this JSON method, which returns a JSON result, which is a type derived from action result. So you're not concerned about, am I overriding on init to do this, on pre-render, post-render, whatever render. So you just write this method, return some object, and now you can use that as a really simple service for your client page. So let's look at another demo. Ajax form and partial updates. So this is a really dirt simple demo where a common scenario is that you have some form and you want to submit it asynchronously and then update some area. So in this I have this to-do list, and the first item on the list is make this work. All right, so I type it, click add. And then you see it flash in. So I add a little jQuery spice on top of my demo as well to do the little animation. So it seems like we're all trying to flash things up a little bit with jQuery. The point of this, though, is to show you that the jQuery works really nicely with Microsoft Ajax. One of the design goals of Ajax was to really try hard not to interfere with the existing libraries out there. So the fact that I can combine these two in order to be productive on this is really nice. So let's look at the code again. So I'm going to start with the view here, and we'll look at Ajax form. Okay. Oops, maybe I didn't hit that. So I'm hitting Alt-Shift-Enter, and that puts you into the full screen mode in case you're wondering. And so what I I have here is this funky looking using block. So one of the misconceptions about the using block or iDisposable pattern is that it's only for disposing resources. And you might be forgiven for believing that because they put it right in the name, iDisposable. But it can also be used for defining a scope. So I want you to start something here, and I want you to end something here, and then stuff is going to happen in the middle. So that's how we're using it with this, this method here. We start a form, and that renders the begin form tag. Then we have our actual form code in the middle, and then on this line, we render out the end form tag. Now, some people I've shown this to think, oh, that's really clever, and other people think that is the ugliest thing I've ever seen. So you don't have to use this helper method. You can, or this particular style. You can actually just call begin form and end form at the bottom. So we support kind of both different ways. But the nice thing is we have this AJAX helper for rendering a form. You specify the action method you want to call, and you specify this set of options, which is just embodied in this class. So in this case, we're going to update a to-do list, and we're going to insert things after. And on success, we're going to call this method that I wrote, flash it. And so we just have a text box called to-do item and a submit button. And if I scroll down a bit, you can see that this is an unordered list, really simple, straightforward HTML with the ID to-do list. So this is the item that we're going to update when I submit this form. And so flash it calls this generic helper method, which really ought to be in a separate script file, but called flash. And in there, I'm using some jQuery, and I'll just kind of show you real briefly what this is doing. So I'm passing it in a CSS selector. So this is the same kind of selector you would use in your CSS file to locate a particular element in your DOM or in your HTML page. So you can see here when I call flash, I specify pound to-do list, which is the ID of the unordered list, and I specify this pseudo class called :last. So it's going to take the last item in the to-do list and then execute this code against it. And then I call this CSS function, which sets the opacity to 0. And then I call a couple animate methods where I specify a couple of different colors. And so I basically fade to yellow and then fade back to white. The thing I should point out is that the color fading is not part of jQuery proper. jQuery comes with a whole slew of plugins. So I had to go out and get jQuery.color.js from the jQuery website in order to make this demo work with the color flashing. So jQuery itself comes with a lot of stuff, but you can go out and get plugins for just about anything. Which is another reason I'm excited that we're including it in there, because it's going to really complement our investments in AJAX nicely. And so, again, flash it is the method it calls when it's on complete. And let's just run it again to see it, because it looks cool. Work. All right, and so with very little work, I'm able to make an otherwise drab-looking application have a little extra punch. And it's not just aesthetics, right? It's also usability. It draws the user's eye to where the change is happening, and now they know what's going on. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, so let's switch back. Thanks, Phil. Next thing I want to talk about is dynamic data, or our data in general in ASP.NET. I don't know how many people in the room have played with this yet, but this is some new technology we have that tries to get web apps up running faster than normal. Basically, just by taking an entity framework model or a link to SQL model and registering it with an ASP.NET application, you can actually have a full running application that lets you browse through your tables and do full CRUD operations against them as well. Obviously, this is attacking the Ruby is on Rail type crowd. This is something that we actually shipped in ASP.NET 3.5 SP1, and we're going to be building on in .NET 4.0. For people that have played with it, I also want to point out that, or have seen it, it's not just about the scaffolding of applications. There's a lot of core functionality that's that's added to the existing data controls in ASP.NET if you play with this technology. Moving forward, what we want to do is try to bring this into the MVC framework as well. So, as Phil's going to show it later today, MVC gives you full control and it's kind of raw. And we want to actually be able to address the line of business app developer as well and say, hey, I want a grid in MVC. How do I do that? And but at the same time, we don't want to take away what is MVC. We don't want to go do a bunch of magic behind the scenes for you. So we're going to find a nice compromise there where we can do both. Something else that we're looking forward, moving forward is if you look at the data source story that we have in ASP.NET today, we have a link data source and an Entity Framework data source that go against our two ORM models for .NET, and we have the object data source, which is kind of if you had your own business layer, you would go against. The negative of object data source is it doesn't give you access to iQueryable. So we're looking at building some kind of abstract data layer, which means, hey, I just want to go write my own business classes, and they return iQueryable. iQueryable is important because when I show some demos in a few minutes, you're going to see some of the stuff that iQueryable enables us to do. And dynamic data-wise, we'd actually want to be able to take one of this data source and just go against it and scaffold your own business objects and stuff. We're also looking at doing things like supporting many-to-many relationships, which is something that we don't support today and Entity Framework supports. So what I'll do now is I'll do a quick demo of dynamic data on MVC. So the bits that I'm showing right now are shipping on CodePlex today. So if you get a kick out of this demo, I recommend you download these things. What this is actually a fully working blog application. So I'm going to run it here. And you can see welcome to my blog. If you play with this, you can actually sign in. So now I'm signed in, and I can go do things like go and add a new post. You can see that this is MVC, but because it's using dynamic data, if I try to add a post here, I'm going to get validation. So I can come in here and do save this. Some junk in there. So fully working blog application. I log out, go back to the home page. Here's my request. It's full support for comments. Once again, you'll see validation kick in. It's actually being really picky. And I'll briefly drill into kind of how this works. Let me blow the font size up a little bit here. Actually, it might already be up. So if you come to the Dynamic Data Talk later this week, it'll be on Wednesday. I'll drill into a lot of how this works. But I just want to point out a few concepts here. One of the concepts is dynamic data is built around something called field templates. And these are basically, they're not controls in the case of MVC, but this is like if I display text. This is how I would, every time I display text anywhere in a page, it would use this template for displaying text. If I want to edit text, it's going to use the text under edit template for editing text. And you'll notice that you can see some of the validation stuff that's inside of here. So we have things like foreign keys, which allows us to do like filtering. We have dates for doing dates. So the idea behind dynamic data is you have these templates that you can control that says, hey, I want dates displayed in my application this way. I want URLs displayed this way. I want hyperlinks displayed this way. And then in the case of dynamic data, we have entity templates, which is how I've got a full object. How do I display the object? We have a default representation, which basically is just going to hide some of this. It's going to loop over the actual data and emit the data. But if I go and look at my controllers up here, in the case of, whoa. That was interesting. If I go up here and look under admin and I drill down, you can see there's an entity template for a post. And this is basically how a post is displayed. This is basically a template, and then elsewhere in the application, when I want to show a list of posts, it basically loops over this particular control, or this particular template. So I don't want to drill in any much more than that for now, but come to the Dynamic Data Talk on Wednesday, and I'll really drill in and show a lot of this stuff. So jump back. And we'll talk about dynamic data in general. Things that we're doing in dynamic data is, if you played with our 1.0 apps, they have pretty weak filtering. They have this filtering where they basically, as you go to a page, it'll show you a list of foreign keys that are associated with the actual data. And you can select those to drill down the data. You can also have Boolean columns that you can check on or off. We're going to richly increase this, where you can actually create your own filters. And because some of the enhancements we're going to make to the actual underlying data sources to give you iQueryable filters, you can write your own filters. We're also going to give more access to how you can control which columns are shown and what order they're shown in. And we're going to add some more of these field templates I was talking about earlier that determines how we display data. So I'll do a demo of this real quick. Okay, so first off, I'm going to start with, I'm going to start off and I want to show filtering. And this is not necessarily dynamic database. This is something we're going to enhance all of our data controls with in .NET 4.0. So that's my default. Let's run this. And if you built a page using like a grid view or a list view or something today, and say you wanted to go put a search box at the top of the page and have the search box, you could type some text in and have it go search various columns in your database. You'll find that's very difficult to do. You've got to write a lot of boilerplate code to do that. So this sample here is going to go over a linked data source. And you're going to notice that I have a bunch of boxes up here. I can type in search, so I'll just type in this. I'll press query, and I'll get nothing back. Perfect. So I typed in Chang, and you'll see the Chang came back. And I'll actually show how this happened, and I'll show why my first sample did not work for me. So let's go look at this. We're doing okay on the fonts. Yeah. Okay, so if we look at the source code for this page, you'll notice that I've got a linked data source, but my linked data source has this new block, which is a query block. And you'll notice that inside of my query block, I have where expressions. And one of these is I have something called a search expression. I can basically specify a comma-separated list of fields that I want to search on, and then I have various search operators. Contains, starts with, ends with. And in this case, notice it says starts with, which is why my first sample failed, because I was looking for a contains with search. And then basically you specify what control you want to get the value to search from. We also have an expression for doing ranges here. So you'll notice on unit price, I do a range min-max with a from and a to, specifying which controls I want to go for. I'll rerun that, or it might still be running. And you can see the range works as well. Unit price between 50 and 100. So what we wanted to do is try to take things that would be very difficult to do with the data source controls by default and give them access to in a much easier format. So this is something that we plan to support against the Entity Framework data source, the link data source, and the new business logic data source that will come sometime in the future that goes against those raw methods. Something else I want to show is I want to show the filtering stuff that I have. So this is a dynamic data application. And for anybody that hasn't seen dynamic data before, what I've done is I've actually got a data model in my project here. And just by default, it's going to go through and build pages for me where I've got full CRUD operations and stuff like that. And I've got this rich filtering. So you can see I can select the true false. This is a typical foreign key filter. But showing some of the new work we can do, this is leveraging on top of that query block you saw before. I've got a category filter now where I can actually just go check on and off particular items. And you'll see the list is actually changing as I do this in real time. Nothing more. So this is showing some of the new query stuff we're going to hook to these data sources and to dynamic data. I've got one more thing I wanted to show dynamic data-wise, and that is we are going to support ADO.NET data services. So what I'm going to do is start a server up here. I'm going to run a client. So ADO.NET data services is something that was codenamed Astoria that we shipped in .NET 3.5 SP1. And we're now trying to support it in dynamic data where you can actually take anything that Astoria is serving and just automatically build a site around it. Let's see if this will come up. So just to show that this is actually working, so what Astoria is basically running data over a REST service. And Astoria is pretty cool from the standpoint you can pretty much take an Entity Framework model, point Astoria to it, and bam, it's published. And you can then control, you can control finally which access of what tables and stuff is available if you want to build your own like service. You can notice here are the Astoria queries that are running as this page is built. And you can see as I change things in real time, you can see the filter that was just applied to the page. And we do full CRUD and all this kind of stuff over Astoria as well. This actually is part of the bits we released today as well. So, and this works against, I'm showing it with dynamic data. This is basically just an Astoria data source control. It works against any of ASP.NET. So if you want to go make an ASP.NET web application that can consume Astoria, this is how you would do it. And I've got one final demo, which is the business logic stuff that I was talking about earlier. And so let me just show you what one of these would look like. Okay. So here is what the data service would look like. I'm building a data service against Northwind. And basically, I can just set my methods on this. As I said, this is very similar to object data source, except everything is returning iQueryable. And because it's returning iQueryable, all that filtering that I was showing earlier can work against it. That's the benefit of getting an iQueryable back is we can filter against that. And if you're actually going against a database that supports LINQ, in the case of Entity Framework or LINQ to SQL, then it will actually fix the actual query to take advantage of the filtering. So the filtering is not happening on the server, it's actually happening on the database. So you're getting the best performance there. You'll notice also that there's attributes associated with these things, saying these are my select methods. This is my insert method. This is my delete method. And that allows things like dynamic data to go look at this and walk over it and figure out what it can show and what it can do automatically. I'll run a quick demo of this. This page will look very similar to the one that I was doing earlier. This is just going against one of those data service calls. Take a parameter. I'll jump back and show that it's actually calling one of these. Help if I tag the right one. But what's cool about that is I can then go and then do all that filtering I was showing before. So I can type in search. Let's type in Cheng. Run this. So even though my method is actually just taking units in stock and returning an iQueryable, I can still party on that iQueryable and do the full search against other columns as well. So something really cool we're working on. So that's kind of a demo of a few of the things we're doing on the data side. Quickly, I just want to run through the wrong way. The last thing I want to talk about briefly was what we're doing with core ASP.NET as well. So one of the things that there's plenty of plugins and stuff for alternate cache providers for ASP.NET. And one of the things that we're doing in the core in 4.0 is we're going to take the ASP cache and make it something that's provider-based. So you can go replace it with your own. So if you've seen the Velocity CTPs and stuff that are out there today, you can put a full cache engine in to ASP.NET and obviously not modify the application because it just works automatically. So what I want to do now is basically point out a few things. We've got, I'm going to be in the pavilion tomorrow, or actually Wednesday from 12:15 to 3:30. So if you have any questions around the dynamic data stuff, the data stuff I was showing, I'd love to answer that. I want to point out some of the sessions. These are on the deck. MVC, which is going to follow this one, Phil's going to do. Bertrand is PC32, which is the Ajax futures. We have Stephen Walther doing PC31, which is a whole talk on jQuery. And then we have PC41, which is the ASP.NET Cache extensibility. That'll be Stefan from our team showing that off. And also right after Phil today, we have Jeff King from Visual Studio that's going to come and show a lot of cool Visual Studio stuff, showing how you can actually deploy web applications from Visual Studio all the way up to your the main site. So at this point, I've got a couple URLs of people from the team, and we'd like to take questions. So if there's any questions, just line up behind the mics, and we'll take some questions. Thanks. Can you get no questions?
Huh? Yeah. Huh? Hi. Huh?
What's your question?
Hi.
Hi.
You showed, we saw a lot of code with jQuery, Ajax, and things like that. But VS 2010 will support this also in IDE without code for more productivity, or just in future versions?
What's the question?
Wizards.
If the question is about Visual Studio supporting jQuery more, is that what you're asking?
Support with wizards and not coding. Do you have that?
Wizards.
Design mode.
probably
I think the question is, are you going to support more design mode wizards? And your demos focused focused mainly on code behind. What sort of support will there be in the ID in Visual Studio for, say, perhaps somebody who doesn't have as much technical sophistication is looking for guidance?
Probably not in this version, no. But
I think the long term, we'd actually like to be able to say that the stuff that Bertrand was showing around, doing the templating and stuff like that. I think at some point we'd like to be able to say you can almost drag controls onto a page, which are going to render client-side. So you'll have a client-side data source you'll drag onto the server-side page. You'll have a client-side repeater you'll drag onto the page, and you'll get that. You might even go through a wizard, as you mentioned, and it'll just work without actually having to actually write the JavaScript or wire the JavaScript together.
Yeah, but for this release, we're really focusing on the code view part of that stuff, so IntelliSense and stuff like that.
Okay, and about all this code, this jQuery code, this Ajax code, and the Script Sharp project, how these things work together, or they don't work together?
So, is the question about Script Sharp and how Script Sharp works with all that?
How Script Sharp work together, all these things we saw.
So Script Sharp is a project that's being managed by Nikhil Kotari, who is the architect in ASP.NET, one of the architects, I should say. And he is currently working on integrating jQuery with Script Sharp, so you will be able to write jQuery code using Script Sharp, yes.
Is this for this new version of VS 2010 or?
Well, as it's really a personal project from Nikhil and a few other people at Microsoft. It's out of the official releases, so it will come much sooner than Visual Studio actually.
Okay. You also demonstrated validators controls with dynamic data. Last time I saw MVC, certo? There wasn't validators controls on MVC, but you demonstrated validation with dynamic data. It's just with dynamic data, or we already have validation with MVC?
So I think there's two parts to that, and the question is about dynamic data validation. So dynamic data validation works by having attributes that are applied to your data model. So for example, I could have a range attribute applied to a column in my data model. And what happens is it's on the server side, those attributes are executed and they actually have an isValid method. So we actually run through the attributes and call isValid on each of those, which means they're technology agnostic. They'll work in web forms, they'll work in MVC, and not have any problems. So yes, but they are semi-dynamic data supported, dependent. But one of the things we'll look at doing in MVC is actually having a model where you can basically have MVC look at those dynamic data attributes if you place them on your objects and automatically call the isValids. So we'll do some work along that area. The other question, which is validation in MVC. One of the things that we want to do, it probably will not be in Dev 10, it would be something out of band, is we want to build new Ajax client-side validation libraries for things like required, validation summary, compare validator. All the validations we have in web forms, we'd like to actually have in a common Ajax library, which could then be called from MVC. That's where we're heading in the future. But I said it won't probably be in Dev 10. It'll probably be something that's out of band next year.
Next year, next VS or beyond?
It would be, obviously it would miss Dev 10. So as I said, it would be out of band. This would be something we'd release on CodePlex sometime next year. You would be able to download and start using right away before the next version of the framework comes out. That's part of the whole point behind our CodePlex work, is allowing people to get our bits earlier instead of waiting for the next framework release. Okay. Can I take a question from the next guy over here? We got some.
Yeah, I've got a question there.
Yes.
What's the relative rate of investment in MVC versus web forms?
I would say we basically have three pillars of development on ASP.NET today. We have Ajax, we have web forms, and we have MVC, and they all get equal billing. So basically, there's three teams on ASP.NET today. One team is working on web forms, one team's working on MVC, and one team's working on Ajax.
And they're approximately the same size
Yes.
teams?
Yeah.
Okay.
We consider them all equal. You know, nothing's going away. You know, don't feel that you have to, if you're a web forms developer today and you're worried that all the investments are being made in MVC, that's not true.
Okay. I just got a easy question. Is the search control that you showed going to be available on Codeplex, or is that just coming out with?
It is actually on It is on Codeplex today, actually. So what it is, the search control that I showed today is an enhancement to the linked data source in the samples that are on Codeplex. When it actually ships in Dev 10, it will be part of the entity framework data source, the linked data source. It'll actually be. Unfortunately, the bits we put on Codeplex are a couple days late. We actually took that query support and pulled it out of the actual data source. It's now an extender control that you actually tack onto the data source. And it has the search, it has the range operators. But what's really cool is you can actually write your own operators for that as well. Basically, given an iQueryable, do an operation and return an iQueryable. So we call these expressions, and you can build your own as well. So it's one of the areas that I'm excited about. I'm going to show more of that in the dynamic data talk on Wednesday.
And that's it works with 3.5, right?
Yeah, it'll work with 3.5. The stuff on Codeplex, we basically spun up a new version of I think it's called system.web.data, and it has a new version of the data source. And you'll notice from the sample that I had, which is the same sample I was showing is on Codeplex. Instead of saying ASP : linked data source, you say futures : linked data source, and that'll get you the new version of it. But it's the same underlying control with that new query functionality added to it. Yeah.
Okay, view state. You said you plan to change the method how the view state can be activated and deactivated.
Yes.
The question is, will it still be possible to deactivate the view state from a control down the whole way, or is this not possible?
Yeah, everything that I was talking about is basically, you know, we're not changing the underlying behavior. It used to be that you can run it just like you do today, or you can use the new granular support to flip it around. So it's basically you'll be able to turn this on or off and have it work as it is today, because we don't want to break any existing compatibility. Or you can do the new way where you can turn it off at the page and then turn it on for things that you want on. They're kind of backwards modes. If we had to do it again, we would have actually made that the default mode.
Okay, thank you.
I have a quick question. What support do you have for unstructured data or databases that self-define themselves in terms of fields of information that you collect over time? You know.
Well, I don't understand the question. What do you mean?
Well, you have a data grid, for example, and there's a new item of information that wasn't previously contemplated. How does that flow through from either from the front end to the back end? Do you need to change your database design, or? If
you're using dynamic data, which is data model based, if you just change your data model, which is entity framework or linked to SQL, it will automatically flow down into the actual controls themselves. So, because when you enable dynamic data against one of our existing data controls, what it really is doing is it's going out there and looking at the actual objects from the ORM. So if you add a field to the ORM or you rename a field to the ORM in the ORM, it'll automatically be reflected in the page without you having to go to the page and manually update that. That's one of the things that I really recommend for people. If you're using one of these ORMs and can use dynamic data, that's one of the benefits of dynamic data is if you go and change a field in your database from nullable to not nullable, dynamic data will automatically change the validation on that field to put a required field validator in, because it's looking at the actual model and seeing if something's nullable or not nullable. Versus in traditional ASP 2.0 style or 3.5 style, you would have manually put that required field validator on that column and had to go and fix it by hand. One of the demos that I'm going to show on Wednesday is called existing pages or something. And it really highlights the fact that using dynamic data, your application can kind of change automatically as your model changes. Does that help?
Yeah, so that happens at run. You can do that at runtime.
Yes.
Basically. Okay, thanks.
Yes, next question.
Is there any support for the ORM or the dynamic data scaffolding on top of CRUD stored procs? or generation thereof?
So the question is, do we do? First off, we do support stored procs, but we don't do scaffolding against them yet. So that business layer that I was showing you, where you actually had the methods that had the attributes on those, that's kind of our hope. Is moving forward, we can, if you, instead of actually putting those on the actual EDMX or the link to SQL, you would actually go build this business layer and put these attributes on it. And because you put the attributes on it, we can understand what those are and what we should do with them. Because if not, we don't have enough metadata to do it. But yes, you should be able to, from the business logic data source, which is part of the bits as well that we put out today, you should be able to actually call stored procs and stuff, and we'll be able to scaffold those eventually.
So the answer is scaffolding over business object implicitly supports underlying structures.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes.
Hi, I have a question. We're using the software plus services paradigm. So from the back end, we're using WCF services, Link, and ADO.NET entities. However, from the front end, it's not very coherent as to which UI technology we're better off using. ASP.NET, using WinForms, using Silverlight, WPF, etc. There's so many choices, and I'm not sure exactly which one to go forward with.
That's a tough call. So, and my quick answer would be, obviously WinForms. The negative, WinForms is a thick client, and so as you modify the client, you've got to go touch all the desktops potentially.
We're using click once.
You can use click once to get around that. I was just going to bring up you can use click once to get around that. You can look at the Silverlight. Kind of the way I would look at this is that works great in a Windows-only shop. Silverlight works well if you want to be able to do the same kinds of rich client stuff that you do inside of WinForms, and you can do that both against Mac and against Windows and against Linux. So
it's not quite ready yet.
Not quite ready for Linux, but if you that's the cross-platform kind of thick client thing to me. And then obviously ASP.NET is for I want to be able to access something from my phone, from my web browser, on the road. I want it to be public. Without having to install any pieces on my browser or whatever. So I think it really just depends. I mean, you could probably draw a grid of what are your business needs and what technologies support those. I know that's not a direct answer. I don't have the perfect answer. It would really depend on what you're trying to do.
I guess my question is, what is Microsoft concentrating on for the future? Which of those UI technologies?
We're concentrating on all of those. ASP.NET, we're concentrating on. Silverlight, we're concentrating on. And, click once, WPF, WinForms.
Okay.
I think it's great that you're supporting jQuery. Our team actually has a large investment in the prototype framework, and I didn't know if some of this work to integrate jQuery would make it easier to also add prototype support into ASP.NET.
Yeah, so we chose to support jQuery because it integrates really well with ASP.NET, and there is very little overlap with ASP.NET Ajax. It doesn't mean that we are telling people not to use another library. It's perfectly fine. There are actually many people using prototype with ASP.NET. So in terms of product support, for the moment, we're only supporting jQuery in that you can call product support 24/7 and get an answer on jQuery. Well, you will be able to do that. We're not planning on doing prototype, but we are encouraging you to use your favorite library with ASP.NET. There is absolutely nothing wrong with that whatsoever. Does that answer your question? Or?
Yeah, I guess maybe the IntelliSense support, would that be something?
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah, absolutely. So if you go to Jeff King's talk, he'll show the new IntelliSense stuff that they are working on in Visual Studio. And they're really focusing on IntelliSense features that work well across all frameworks. They are not... So they are doing a few things around ASP NET Ajax, but they are not giving it any special treatment otherwise. So what works with jQuery should work just great with prototype, and I know they're testing with prototype, so you can expect some progress there.
Great, thank you.
So with the whole dynamic data list generation and stuff like that, yeah, I seem to have gone.
I'm looking for Scott because he should answer dynamic data questions. I don't know yet.
Well, it's basically a JavaScript issue. With accessibility, how does accessibility and the whole dynamic data work together, like the accessibility browsers and stuff like that?
And by accessibility?
I mean screen readers and so on.
I don't know. Does anybody? Does Mike? Do you know anything about accessibility and like using grid views and stuff like that? I don't. You have any? You have any idea?
Yeah. So I mean, I don't think there's really anything special in dynamic data in terms of accessibility. I mean, it really comes down to the templates that you're going to use. Louder? Okay. It really comes down to the templates that you're going to use. So I mean, if you're using the standard templates that use like.
The question is grid view accessible though?
I mean, is your question really about grid view?
The question is about the dynamically generated HTML you use for the dynamic data stuff.
So the dynamic data generated HTML, it's not really generating HTML, it's actually we have templates. So if you go look at a dynamic data project today, there's a directory that's called page templates. It has templates of the application. If you go look at those templates, they're basically a repeater over filters, and then there's a grid view or a list view and potentially a details view. So if you can make the grid view or the details view accessible, then they're accessible in dynamic data. There's nothing in dynamic data is not generating HTML. It's actually using the underlying controls, grid view, details view, to actually do the display, or list view to do the display. So if you can make those accessible, then the dynamic data pages would be accessible.
Okay, so but the HTML is still generated by JavaScript, isn't it? Or inserted it?
The HTML is actually, as I said, if you want to find me after the show, if you want to come up here, I can actually show you my notebook and show you how it works and show you the actual pages. So what it's doing is there's actually a page template, which is a real ASP.NET page. And all that's happening at runtime is we're automatically injecting the right table and the right columns into that page. Okay. So and you can actually take that page. We normally have one that we use across everything that you see, but you can also customize those on a table-by-table basis if you wanted to for accessibility or something else. But if the grid view is accessible, and I unfortunately don't have the answer to that, then dynamic data is accessible.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Okay. Over here. Any more questions?